information started coming in that Ramadi was getting really, really bad. So what they ended up doing was they brought in an expeditionary sniper team to train a whole bunch of snipers very, very quickly. And that's what they ended up doing with us. And they turned us into what was called the small kill team.
9/11, the attack on our country, will live in history for as long as I live, probably as long as anyone viewing this video will live. It was a dark period in our country. It's where terrorists hijacked planes and attacked our country by flying a plane into the U.S. Pentagon, two planes into the Twin Towers, and by the heroic act of our fellow Americans on a flight. The last plane, the fourth plane, never made its destination, which was believed it was headed towards the White House. Have you ever stopped to think what the impact, the psychological impact to those who witnessed these catastrophic events? Today, on our new series, Vets and Badges, we want to interview an American hero who witnessed as a teenager the Twin Towers collapse from his classroom. I am Robert Asencio. Next to me is retired police chief, a military historian, and my co-host, David Magnusson. How are you, David?
Doing good, doing good. You know, the worst of times in America brings out the best of people.
Absolutely.
And I think we are going to be talking to one of the best right now.
Yes, by far, by far. So let's go right into it. Today, it is our great honor and privilege to introduce to you an American hero, a person who we had the pleasure of meeting recently, who literally went from high school to war to police service. We are speaking with Benjamin Thomas Iobst. How are you, brother?
I'm doing okay. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good.
Awesome,
thank you.
man. Let's get right into it. Let's make this a conversation because I think our viewers have a lot to benefit from your experiences. But I want to also touch on helping others who are struggling with mental health. But let's back up a little bit. So tell us about that day on 9/11 when you witnessed the towers, and what did that do to you?
So I was in study hall in high school, and I remember sitting there, and I had planned to go to college. I wanted to study either meteorology or computer science. And they back then they had the TVs on the little stands. If you guys remember those, they didn't have TVs in every classroom, and they rolled one into the classroom and turned it on. And I believe that was right around the time that the second plane struck. And as I was watching everything happen, a couple minutes later, the towers go down. I remember kind of saying to myself, "So we've got to do something. Something needs to be done here to bring justice to this situation." Um, so my whole life changed then. I decided instead of going to college that I would join the military, the U.S. Army, and I actually deployed. I'm sorry, I went to basic training 3 days after I graduated high school.
Like so many Americans, right? We're inspired to fight back, right? We're not going to take it. We're not going to take an ass beating without fighting. You joined, and it's interesting is that some years later you find yourself deployed in Iraq for Iraqi Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom. You become a sniper, and you provide overwatch in Ramadi. You want to talk a little bit about that training leading up to your deployment?
So I had already done a combat deployment at that point as a regular infantryman in a mortar platoon. And what we ended up doing was we started out that deployment on the Syrian border, actually. And information started coming in that Ramadi was getting really, really bad. So what they ended up doing was they brought in an expeditionary sniper team to train a whole bunch of snipers very, very quickly. And that's what they ended up doing with us. And they turned us into what was called, the term's not used anymore, but a small kill team, where we would basically go out and find ways to interdict when in historic ambush sites. So the real gist of it was to ambush and ambush.
So 2006, you're in Ramadi, and I sent you some material on that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
That was fascinating. First of all, the breakdown, but the 8-minute video on just the sniper fight that was going on, the firefight that was going on, trying to get people out to the cars and move them from point A to point B, soldiers and stuff. It was it was rough. It was rough.
yeah. So 2006. The reason why I'm mentioning 2006 specifically is because there was a memo released from military command. I believe it's a branch of the Marines. Um, it was released. It was not supposed to be released to the public or made public, where the U.S. military command thought that Ramadi was basically a lost cause for the American soldiers to go in there and police. And so it was also dubbed or named the most violent city for combat in country. And you're deployed there as a sniper to provide protection for soldiers. Tell us a little bit about that.
So that was an experience to say the least. There were a whole bunch of us that were functioning in that capacity. It was a mixture of some platoons from the U.S. Army, um, the scout snipers from the Marine Corps. Then there was also a SEAL team that was there in that
Was that
capacity.
SEAL Team 3? SEAL Team 3?
That was, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, they were called Task Force Bruiser. So they functioned at the same outpost as us. And for a while, we actually did some operations together. But it was the Wild West is the best way I could describe it. Conventional forces would get attacked. The supply runs and things like that would get hit by IEDs, severe ambushes, and we would then get sent out to basically sneak out and hold an area for a couple days and overwatch that historic site where they were attacking the U.S. troops from, and we would wait, and if they began to mobilize against friendly troops, we would mobilize against them.
For those that watched war movies recently, American Sniper, Chris Kyle wasn't part of the member of SEAL Team 3. Um, and they credit his surviving teammates, credit the Army troops for being there and helping um, basically control that city that was at one point uncontrollable. That was just a death zone for those that went in there that were attacked by the insurgents. So while you're serving, uh, you experienced heavy combat situation where it's really, man, you must have been some dark points. Let's talk a little bit about that. How did you feel coming out of those combat missions?
Well, it was one hell of an experience, I would say, to kind of give it a gentle explanation. I came home and I thought, and I had an amazing platoon, an amazing battalion that I worked with, an amazing company that I worked with. I worked with Bravo Company and then Charlie Company and also HHC. Just all around excellent leaders. But then you come home, and when I came home, I wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do right away. Um, so I figured I already have a level of training in maintaining order, so I decided that the police force was a direction that would be the most logical for me. And I will say that the order of going right to the police academy after getting back really did help. It was good to have that order early on, but the damage was in there, and I told myself I was perfectly fine, and that anybody else who had been in the situations that myself and my guys had been in, that they would be exactly like me, and that's probably accurate, and that's why they have therapists and PTSD clinics and all of those things, because a lot of people that have gone through exactly what we went through were exactly like us. But I told myself I was perfectly fine, and I wasn't. I really wasn't. So I started on the job, and the city of Allentown, Pennsylvania, is a it's a medium-sized city. It's a city of the third class in Pennsylvania. It does have a pretty substantial amount of gang violence and violence, and especially around that time period, there was a lot of gang violence at that time period. And I remember starting, and I think it was my first or second day, we were on a gang shooting. There was a guy shot in the leg, and I remember my field training officer was kind of looking at me to see how I'd react. And I actually walked up to the guy who was shot, and he was kind of hopping around. He had been shot in the leg, and I told him to sit down and stop being such a baby because he had just been shot in the calf. And I think that right there is a direct example of kind of how far gone I already was. That here we have a gang shooting in broad daylight in an American city, and I think it's nothing. I don't think it's a big deal at all. So I was already on the far end of overly traumatized at that point, and that was, you know, right after the police academy, and I'm in my entry training at that point.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your wards, and then we'll get right into the police because you're going to a place that really we need to go to and discuss with the viewers. Right. So let's first of all, congratulations on your commendation, your citation. You with extreme valor for your combat missions. Um, we owe you, our country owes you an immense amount of gratitude. But let's talk about that.
In reading that though, one thing that jumped out at me among many complimentary things that were said, no regard for personal safety, outstanding patience. I mean, that's something. I mean, that's something that would translate well into the law enforcement realm, right? Uh, but here you're almost reprimanding yourself a little bit on your first 2 days out there when you sort of said, with the gangbanger that got shot in the calf, don't be a baby. Do you think you lost or a little compassion, or you just figured, no, this is the way, you're just translating straight over, and that, come on, get with the program to this kid who got shot? What do you think on that?
I really think that a combination of things were going on. Back then, my my instinct really was that we had to provide him with help, and him hopping around wasn't going to be helpful. That he needed to sit down and cooperate so we could wrap his leg up and put a tourniquet on him. Um, but understanding what I understand now, all these years later, uh, I was checked out. I was cold. I had completely gone cold, and that's a normal thing for a lot of us, and it definitely was for me. Um, I turned the emotions off, completely off, and that isn't really a healthy way to go about living life, because that was all the time. It wasn't just
Mm-hmm.
at work. I was going home with that same coldness, that same detracted type of emotion. Everything was just kind of mechanical.
Do you think? I'm sorry.
No, I was going to ask
Go ahead.
something because it dawned on me here that if you take a look at cops after a certain amount of time, depending on what they do and what areas they work, they too can get very cold to that, where they will tell, hey, zip it, or even worse, so let rescue work on you, whatever.
I think that the area that I wasn't ready, and I think we're still sending our officers out there unprepared, is we do hundreds and hundreds upon hundreds of hours of training on how to properly take care of the public, and barely anything on how to properly take care of ourselves. Um, which, how can we do a good job if we're not taking care of ourselves? But it's not really taught locally, and I know down in Miami too, that there is a focus, and locally here in the Lehigh Valley, that focus is starting to come into the lens where we're paying attention to how our first responders are doing, and not just how they're doing, but starting to front end this with training on how to deal with what they see and experience, and not only how to deal with it, but how to thrive on the other end of this, how to deal with things in a healthy way, and then have a good life, not not the degraded life that we generally see from police officers, where the average life expectancy is 10 to 15 years less. I think that's something that we can change, and I think training really comes into play on the front end with that.
Some of the streets, I mean, it sucks to say this, but some of the streets that these police officers are going across, are policing in parts of our country, are mini war zones. And is the leadership prepared to address their needs, the officers' needs?
When I was younger in my career, and when people were struggling, everything was taken care of very quietly. That's not to say there wasn't anything there, but it just wasn't talked about, and that is actively changing because we have to actively change at this point. Um, I think COVID really taught us that we've really got to zero in on some of the issues that we have within law enforcement and taking care of ourselves. I know, at least from what I experienced, we were out there working during COVID, and we didn't really know what it was at that point. So you're going into houses with a surgical mask on, finding a body, and then the coroner's showing up with a hazmat crew, and you're standing there going, "Oh man, I got to go home to my family." Still doing all the 911 calls and the murders and the assaults in the interim. Um, and then the tail end of that was all the riots, all the discord in the country. And we saw a lot of officers not doing too well at that time. So we really focused in, and it was kind of born out of the critical incident stress management model, where that's been there for most of my career. Where if there's a huge incident, they bring in therapists and psychologists to help debrief with the guys. Um, but a group of us got together and kind of asked ourselves, like, there's got to be something more we can do here, because being a person that has gone through this myself, very few guys are going to say, "Hey, I'm having an issue," right in the middle of a debriefing with all these other people there. Those problems usually pop up 3 6 months, a year later, um, and sometimes we don't even attribute it. We start drinking heavily, and it sneaks up on you. You don't even realize it's related to all the stress that's built up. So what we ended up doing was, again, though, it's a back end thing where we started vetting out therapists, rehabs, financial counselors to help officers if they needed any help. And then we do wellness training to try to educate them on what stress looks like, so they don't go as far down the rabbit hole. But I really think that front end is really needed. We need to arm our people day one with training to be able to deal with stress in a way that um, they're not internalizing it. They don't have to go through all the motions, have a bunch of issues, and then have to hopefully seek help, and hopefully that area has help available. We can put that training on the front end. And that's not to say that they may not still need help, but at least they can get help a whole lot earlier before it turns into a major loss in the quality of their life. In terms of leadership, locally, we do have a lot of support uh, for a lot of the movements going on, a lot of the officer wellness movements. I think the biggest issue that we're consistently running into is just there's not enough manpower in order to assign people as that being their job, and sending people to training is a difficult situation with the low manpower. Being a police officer is not a popular profession right now. So, I mean, across the board in this country, we have low recruitment and high turnover. So, one of the things that we're trying to kind of navigate here is how do we get this training out there? How do we get wellness out there for officers with minimal manpower and no budget and very little time? And that's a hard question. We're trying to navigate that. And the only answer I can think of is what we're doing here. We do it all by volunteer, so it's passion projects that people do. It's something I do as a volunteer, but if our country wants to take it seriously, I think our politicians need to invest in it. They need to say, "Hey, we want to make sure our first responders are healthy," and now's the opportunity to do it. Because if there's only there's only two options when you have low manpower and low recruitment rates, it's either lower the standard or increase the benefit. And if our society were to say, "Hey, we see that we put you guys through a very very difficult um, set of incidents, and we want to take care of you. We acknowledge that what you go out there and do may cause damage, and we're going to invest in taking care of first responders." I think that would send a heck of a message. And
David?
I don't think people get it with law enforcement fully. I think they get the topical stuff. I think they're quick to comment Monday morning, maybe Tuesday and Wednesday morning quarterback. Going back historically, I mean, talking about shell shock in World War One, right? 1,000-yard stare. Talking about in the next war, a general slapping somebody that was uh, going through that, right? And then Eisenhower made him apologize to the doctors and nurses, that being Patton. Uh, we've come a ways. I'm not so sure in law enforcement in this country, for whatever reason, that people give it enough time to realize what the officers are going through on a nightly basis, a daily basis. Uh, are there foul ups sometime? Of course. But by and large, what they go through mentally, and you want them to keep going and going and going, robotic, and something's going to give out and something's going to break. And this is where programs like Benjamin's talking about, like we talk about, come into play. You know, in 2007, Petraeus and Mattis rewrote the FM 324, right? Insurgency to, more to protect the population rather than kill insurgents. That was the focus here. There is a translation over into law enforcement in the sense that law enforcement officers here in this country are counterinsurgents. The insurgency is the crime.
Yeah.
We're getting ambushed. Ambushes are going up across the nation on cops getting calls and getting gunned down. But that's it. Buying into the public, protecting the public, talking to the public. But in turn, the public needs to have their back as well and believe in them.
Yeah.
And that's about as best as I can put it.
So basically, we must educate the public, and I guess that's why. Not, I don't guess. I know this is why we've come together, and we want to continue with these programs, these episodes. Ben, if anybody in the audience or that would view this video wants to get a hold of you, wants to learn more about the peer support program that you and your brothers and sisters are putting together or have put together, where can they find more information about you?
so the fastest way to get a hold of me would be through our wellness team email, and that is LV, L as in Lima, V as in Victor, L as in Lima, E as in Echo, O as in Oscar, assistance, ASSISTANCE at gmail.com. And you can get a hold of me, and a couple more of my team members monitor that. And kind of the one cool thing about the wellness model that we're using is we don't own this. We don't own this at all. We designed it as a fellowship. So if local law enforcement, fire department, or regionally, like an EMS group, wants to start their own peer wellness group, we will send you everything we've got for them to be able to take, switch the name, use. We kind of want this to just spread. We want the thought process to spread that we need to take care of one another, and we need to take our mental and physical health seriously. It needs to be a priority, because if we don't make it a priority, we're going to have a long road ahead of us.
So true. Couldn't say it any better. We have the last 45 seconds. Before we go, we will flash Ben's name on the screen for anyone that wants to Google him. I suggest you do. This is a true American hero who has not only served our country faithfully abroad as a member of the military, saved countless lives abroad, but also here now in our country, served in the Allentown Police Department, where he heroically saved least two people that I know of, if not more, on the job. But now he's beyond retirement, still serving our community by providing peer support to officers or anyone in need. Truly, truly admirable. Ben, I know we must bring you back another time. David, what do you say we bring him back?
Oh, for sure.
For sure.
Absolutely.
So we'd like to discuss
It's a
more in
lot to talk
detail.
about.
Yes,
It's a lot
more
to
in
talk
detail about your studies and your work and integrate you into the fold of this program. Um, but for now, we're going to say bye because we're running out of time. To the producer behind the scene, Rachel Brummage, we can't thank you enough. The Millers, Miami's Community News team, Michael Grant Miller, and the entire staff here, as well as more importantly, or equally as important, you, the public. Thank you.